Hey, it's Paul Yeager. Welcome inside the MTOM podcast studio here at Iowa PBS. This week on the podcast, we're going to have another one of our in the field stories. We're going to be talking with Paul Thomas, a farmer from North Dakota. And you're like, wait a minute, North Dakota was just in the news for a whole bunch of snow. Yes, it's not news when it happens in February. It is when it turns to April and the fields are ready to go. The snow had melted, the ground had started to thaw, and then almost 30, actually it was almost 40 inches of snow fell over a 3-day period up there for Paul. So we're going to talk about him and the challenges ahead for this year, where they're sitting moisture-wise. They are right on the border of where snow and rain had fallen in the last few months and what that means moving forward here for 2022. If you have any feedback for me, hit me up at paul.yeager@iowapbs.org. Paul's in Velva, North Dakota, which is between Minot and Bismarck, so north central part of the state. So we'll find out why corn is blossoming there and what are some of the other crop decisions that he is making this season. But first, we have to start talking about those national championship bison. Is there anything better than a bison game in the Fargo Dome?
Well, that's one of the highlights that we have each fall, but I would guess for our farm, 50 bushel soybeans and 150 bushel corn, we'd rank right up there for our farm. But yeah, we definitely enjoy the tailgating, the Bison football games, and we currently have 2 sons that both attend NDSU. So it's a great opportunity for my wife and I to not only enjoy some Bison football, but also get to see our kids.
Do you remember the days of the outdoor stadium and miss those?
So my first year at NDSU, we had the old Dakota field and the outdoor stadium. And, there were some really cold days, but there was certainly an energy and an excitement that, is tough to be replicated in an indoor stadium. The thing that I probably remember more is the first few years of that dome. My sophomore through senior year, the Bison did not have a strong competitive team like we have lately. We were a sub 500 team, and attendance was extremely poor in the dome. And so you went from this great atmosphere at Dakota Field, full packed, shoulder to shoulder, and all of a sudden you're in a 20,000, 18,000 seat dome with 2,000 people in it. And it just was not an exciting atmosphere, that's for sure.
Times have changed, and they're a national power now. And do you think that that's one of the best ambassadors for your state has been the football team?
It certainly has reflected a positive winning image of our state, and that culture of, we're all in this together, the power of the herd, everyone together. It's not one for one, it's one for all. So I think that image and that, resilience, that toughness is a positive reflection on our state. And certainly, it's resulted in success. We have lots of things in our state to be proud of. Certainly agriculture is our leading industry. And I think all of us that are in that industry are very proud of being part of that industry here. We're very diversified. We've been very resilient through a lot of challenging weather that we face all the time in North Dakota. And, we have lots of things to be proud of in our state.
You also, at least on Market to Market, we spent some time covering the oil patch in the Williston, the early 2010 era and the boom. The Bakken was rocking, and the Bakken has kind of been a little different. You are right, 50, 100 miles west of where the Bakken ends?
Yeah, so that's real close, 50 to 100 miles to the heart of it. Probably, 50 to the edge, 100 to the heart. So during the early years when the Bakken was rocking, as you said, our community here, just on the eastern side of Minot, really felt impacts more positively. Not that all the impacts weren't, good overall, but we gained young families into our community that didn't want to be in that scuttlebuttle and was willing to, commute to the work. We got, a number of people that really, valued the small town Class B, local sporting scene and tight knit community. churches, all of that. So our community, benefited from that. We certainly had the inflation that all the other communities in the area saw with housing prices increasing dramatically, and very difficult time in finding labor and work, at affordable rates. But that the state kind of terms the Bakken play right now as a mature industry. So, we're still pumping out 1 million barrels of oil, and, it's, a dramatic impact on our state's budget, positively. And it's still a, major driver of our state's economy, but it's not the chaos, let's say, of the early years. It's, certainly matured, and the growth now has been more steady rather than a straight up climb.
Well, and the communities out there have developed and been able to catch up with some infrastructure demands, whether it was on water and roads and grocery stores and housing, and that sounds very familiar with the rest of the country in a conversation. But you're kind of hoping, you mentioned the gift of $50 or $50 beans. Well, that'd be newsworthy. 50 bushel to the acre beans, but the corn. I was talking to my 12-year-old this morning. I said, "Hey, I got to go home. I'm doing an interview with a farmer in North Dakota. He had 20 to 30 inches of snow last week." And he turned and looked at me. Says, "Wait, did you say 30?" I go, "Yeah, just, that's I'd say normal, but it wasn't." What was that storm like last week?
It's been a long time since we've had a 3-day blizzard where you literally could not leave your home. My oldest son had made it home from college before the blizzard started, and we halfway through it, you get kind of stir crazy, and jumped on a couple mountain sled snowmobiles that we have. And even that day, about a half mile to our closest neighbor, and rode up there, and then rode back home. And, the disorientation that you even had in that little area that, like the back of your hand, it was so quick to happen because it was almost a total whiteout. Snow continued continuously almost those 3 days, and the wind was relentless. So people would say it's a good old fashioned blizzard. It's like one of those that you're going to talk about for a long time. It's certainly not unprecedented, not like the first time this has ever happened in North Dakota. Probably one of the things that struck us as producers or farmers that hit us maybe more than if this would have been March or even earlier in the year is we had the drill hooked up and ready to start seeding the day before this blizzard hit. So the ground temps were above 40 degrees. The soil was dry. Planting conditions would have been, close to ideal. And we just decided, well, with this big blizzard coming, we'll wait. And so I think just that wrapping around that mentally is that, okay, we're ready to go seeding. And now 4 days later, when you look outside, it's it's going to be a few weeks. So
weeks,
but yeah, a few weeks. To the advantage of a melt right now with the snowstorm coming the way it did, versus if we were just melting off from a long, hard winter, is we're not only getting the melting from above, from the sun, it's melting from below since our ground was unthawed and open. So to that benefit, we figure a little over a 2-inch moisture equivalent here in our area is what the Weather Service came up with. And a lot of that I'm expecting is going to go straight in the ground and not run off into our sloughs and potholes, just because of the unique thing here that our ground was open and unthawed. So that's a positive thing. We see these snowbanks shrinking daily. It's still pretty well white across everywhere here, but the thing that's really slowing this down, and the reason I feel pretty fairly right saying a few weeks to get going, is our forecasted temperatures are so low. We're only getting up into the upper 30s and freezing each night. Our typical temperatures this time of year are upper 50s and not freezing at night. So and whenever you have snow cover, it always reflects that radiation up and keeps your temperatures cooler. So until we can get rid of the snowpack, it's going to be a while until we can warm up, and then we got to rewarm that ground up and dry out what are going to be inevitably some potholes, which quite honestly we're going to be thankful for, coming off of last year's devastating drought that we had.
Well, you are in an area, you mentioned you're near Minot, north of Bismarck. You call it north central part of North Dakota, a little south north central is
Yeah.
probably closer to it there when you get in the Minot area. So you're the Missouri River is close by, which has kind of been a dividing line for dry, not dry coming into this year. So you are on the we're not as dry side. Is that what I'm hearing?
So yeah, during last year's production season, we were in the very, very dry. I think we were, there's always someone worse, but it was really bad in this region of North Dakota where we farm at. And fortunately, our particular region, as you're saying, east of the Missouri River, and particularly in our particular locale, we had significant fall rains in September and October last year. Not so significant that we, were worried about not getting in the field, but we certainly replenished topsoil and some subsoil. So we went into winter saying, okay, if we get a normal snowfall, we're probably better off than we were in total last year already coming into the spring. And that wasn't the case as you were west of the Missouri River. Those areas did not get the fall precip that we had. And throughout the winter, we were close to normal snowfall in our area. And out west, and especially northwest, they received almost no precipitation all winter long. And the southwest part of the state, drills had been going for weeks already before this storm hit. And they were very, very worried about, not only the agricultural production, but certainly the livestock. Was there going to be any hay and grass for 2 years in a row, after coming off of last year's devastating effects that it had on the ranching community in our state. Again, this couple inches equivalent of moisture that we're getting out of this, and for our particular farm, and especially as you go west, is a blessing. It's certainly going to do more to enhance our production than hurt it, even though we're going to have delayed seeding and planting. It's not getting to a critical point for our region. Typically, if we're May 5th, May 10th, if we can get rolling, I think everybody's going to be pretty happy with that.
The market kind of likes the Mother's Day time frame. They start getting excited when you haven't put much corn in by Mother's Day. Is that accurate for you too?
So if I could seed or plant my corn, ideally May 5th to May 10th, year in, year out, would be the typical time for us. Like you could pick 5 days that you would have it all in the ground. Now we typically try and start at the end of April, just knowing that you don't get 5 perfect days in a row and you're not going to be able to plant it all in that period of time. And then, each year is different here too, obviously. The latest that I have comfortably planted corn is May 25th. That's, I believe that's our crop insurance date as well. Not that really dictates why I stopped then or not, but there's been 2 years that I've planted a couple fields that late in the year where we were just so wet, couldn't get in the fields. And, the corn matured and everything, but you're battling it all year. You certainly have a significant yield drag by getting that far out. The May 5th to 15th, I would say, you feel pretty good about your corn production. But after that, you certainly start losing some of that growing degree days that you're going to need to make those varieties mature in our northern climate.
You're right on an edge. I think you told me that kind of where corn can grow well and a little more of a challenge. How long has it been that way?
Well, corn has traditionally always been in our region as a silage source, for feed. And to a certain degree, through 70s and 80s, people would try a field here and a field there. Really with the onset of ethanol production and the demand that created, the corn production increased in our region. For me personally, it wasn't just the economics, and originally I wouldn't say it even was the economics of corn. Our yields weren't that great when I first started growing corn in the late 1990s. We were shooting for that 85 to 100 bushel corn, and part of the value in that for our farm was we were growing so much wheat, a little bit of barley in that rotation, and bumping up against disease concerns constantly with those cool season grasses. We're in an extreme wet cycle. Our fields are just wet and wet and wet, just not sucking enough moisture out of them. So when ethanol production came around and corn prices increased a little bit, it gave us the opportunity to diversify our crop rotation and get a warm season grass in there that improved all of our production of all our crops we were growing. And then with the onset of, discovery of a lot of new varieties, just the overall production practices improving each year of trial and error on our farms and working with extension service and the private industry, we've gotten those yields now to a point that certainly your viewers in Iowa wouldn't think much of, but, for our region, we're certainly across our farms with very variable soils. Depending on some fields, we might be still shooting for that 110 bushel average, but we certainly have that land that's doing 150, 160 now in the more productive areas. So, we've greatly increased our production and with that our profitability from growing corn, and so it's been a really valuable part of our farming operation.
Paul, the majority of your corn is used locally, shipped? What's the end use?
So in our state, I believe it's roughly 50 to maybe 60%, depending on production, kind of stays within the state or within the really local region. Most of that being ethanol demand. And we have a real shortage of, of animal agriculture in North Dakota. So there isn't a lot that's kept locally for animal feeding. Now, in my particular region here, we have an ethanol plant about 70 miles away. But our Canadian neighbors that feed a lot of cattle and a lot of pigs, the Canadian border straight north is only about 70 miles from my farm as well. So we actually see a fair amount of our corn making it up into the Canadian market to feed livestock. And one of the things that we're working on as North Dakota corn growers is trying to get more value-added agriculture through livestock here in our state, with the addition of a couple of soybean crush plants coming online, with the availability of soy meal, the abundance of corn that we have in this state. We'd certainly like to see our state grow in retention of feeder cattle, as well as the growth in the hog industry.
You mentioned, I think you were kind of referring, we're based at Iowa PBS, and that's like what folks have thought of, all we do is corn. But that corn belt continues to expand as the price, as you mentioned, there's exports, there's ethanol, there's competition for animals. I mean, that has created, we just look at yes, we're losing acres just because of developments or whatnot, but man, the production still stays strong. It keeps getting bigger, because when you go from, say, 80 bushels to 150 bushels an acre, all that starts to add up. And so do you keep seeing corn expanding going forward here? Do you ever see an end to the road of corn production?
Well, no, I really don't. I think that new uses for corn, whether that's, plastics, whether that's, more fuel, whether we increase ethanol blends in our fuel supply, whatever those uses may be, I believe when we have that product available, we're going to continue to have, investment in this industry that will continue to find those new uses and continue to find uses for that demand. Just for example, one of the things, that we've seen in the Canadian feeding market is they don't typically produce very much corn at all in Canada. But as they've had more local source from North Dakota and Minnesota of corn, they realized the advantages of having that corn in their feeding rations rather than barley or rather than feed wheat. And so it's not always a brand new demand. It's sometimes displacement of other, feed grains. But to a certain degree, as I kind of mentioned earlier in our discussions, is that addition of corn replacing, let's say, some barley acres or replacing some wheat acres, it has been very positive to our farms from a soil health standpoint. It's not like we're removing a traditional grain that that needs to be growing to make us profitable, or we're stretching for the stars here and grasping at straws. But it's actually something that's, the addition of those corn acres into our farming system, not only economically has proved positive, but it also agronomically and soil health wise has been a real win for crop rotations.
You mentioned rotation. I think you said wheat, sorghum. What else do you grow there?
Not sorghum, but
Barley.
Yep,
Yeah.
wheat and barley and oats. We grow on our farm as cool season grasses, and then corn, of course. And then broadleafs, like for instance, this year we're going to have soybeans, dry yellow peas, and flax. In my region here, a lot of producers produce a lot of canola. That's a pretty strong commodity in our region. And then we're very diversified in this region where people will grow any sort of crops like lentils or chickpeas. Typically in the past, we typically are edible dry bean, pinto bean growers. Just market conditions and the challenges we've had in the last couple of years with drought. We're not growing those this year, but we have a menu of crops to pick from each year. And most producers in our region, look at that menu each winter and evaluate, what's going to be best.
I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with a producer in Kansas, and I'm going to go back to our original conversation about the North Dakota State bison. The bison, when they're on the field, look like a sunflower a little bit with the yellow and the green. And are you in that area of sunflowers, and has that ever entered your debate, especially given the geopolitics of the world right now?
So sunflowers were kind of what made our farm our farm. My father started growing sunflowers in the 1970s. And it was a third to a fourth of our crop rotation every year. It was extremely profitable. It was grown in rotation with wheat and barley. And when we hit the 90s, we entered a really wet cycle, and plant disease, but more so the constant bombardment of blackbirds destroying every acre of sunflower we grew was just more than we could handle. And then we switched into soybean production at that time. And, to tell you the truth, the ease of growing soybeans versus the challenges of growing sunflowers, it would take a lot for many producers in our region to switch from soybeans back to sunflowers. I think what would drive that in our region would be a return to weather conditions like we had last year, those really droughty conditions. A sunflower plant is much more resilient, will deep root a lot farther than a soybean or a corn plant, and often produces a profitable crop on those really droughty years. But I think we're going to have successive years of drought before you'll see widespread adoption of sunflowers again in our region.
Many factors. It's not always just price at the market, right?
Yeah. And like with sunflowers, it certainly has a lot of advantages. Like last year, we had nitrogen that wasn't used at all by our crops because we were just so droughty, and so we have really high N values going into this year's production season. Sunflowers would be a perfect match for that, for drawing that nitrogen that's on top, as well as the stuff that's leached down a little further in the subsoil profile. So they're definitely a great crop. Just a lot of us have some not so positive memories of growing them.
Well, and that's, you can't predict when a drought happens, but you certainly know what the pattern is setting up for, or what the soil has charged in it. Go back to what's the snow out your window right now on top of soil that had melted that now getting a recharge. So again, let's discuss the current weather situation. What did the Thomas family measurement of snow there in Velva say that you had last week?
So with all of the winds, it was of course difficult to measure it because we have banks.
The wind blows in North Dakota. Is that news?
Every once in a while. Yeah. So but there's 6 to 7 foot drifts, and then there's areas in like a shaved off soybean field where there's probably only 6 or 7 inches. But I think so in Minot, which is 35 miles from us, their official over the whole week long, 6-day long period of snow, their official measurement was 48 inches. I believe in at our particular place, we're maybe in that 40-inch, maybe 42 inches would be my best guess of snowfall during that whole period of time. And as typically happens in March and April snows in North Dakota, it's a wet snow. So, we often talk about December, or certainly January and February snowfalls in North Dakota don't really do much for enhancing your moisture profile because it's light, fluffy. The wind typically wears it out before spring melt comes anyways. And so, but this, as we talked about, the ground was open. So a lot of this moisture is going to hopefully soak in and get us a good start to next year. One of the things we're really, kind of concerned about, or maybe looking at it positively too, is this upcoming weekend, there's another major system moving into North Dakota, and we're kind of in the bullseye again, right at our location of that. But different than last week, the temperatures are supposed to be a little warmer. So the first couple days of it are supposed to be, a steady rain. And then Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening into Sunday, there you got us right on the line of 6 to 12 inches of more snow. And so if that, whole 3-day period is a nice slow couple inch rain, it'll, probably get rid of 95% of our snow. Most of that will soak in whatever the ground can handle in that period of time, and probably accelerate our spring. Now, on the other hand, if we do get another foot of snow and put that blanket on our ground, that's certainly going to add at least another week, and then you have the potential that, we do know that eventually we're not going to have 40-degree days and freezing at night. We're going to have that 75-degree day. It's going to melt extremely quick, even though the ground's open. It's all going to, not all, but a lot of it's going to run off and create a lot of, potholes and some localized, potential localized flooding situations. So, a slow, steady, nice little rain this weekend would probably be the best thing that could happen, and to get us moving forward for spring.
And that slow, steady, that's what everybody wants. We don't need those 2 inches and 20-minute type rainfalls or anything like that.
Right.
When you said the drill's hooked up, what's in the drill, and what were you going to seed here, and what do you hope to seed soon?
So we would have started with spring wheat in the drill, and then we would have went to yellow peas. It would have been our planned use of that drill at that time. Coming, into the spring now, we'll certainly be running the drill and the planter at the same time. But our priority, as soon as the ground conditions are fit, will certainly be to get the corn seed in the ground. That'll be priority number one. Like I said, the drill will be running at the same time as the planter, but certainly our priority focus will shift to getting the corn in the ground. It certainly would have plenty of time, but it seems like in North Dakota anyways, or in our region, when it starts raining, it typically keeps doing it for a while, and so you all of a sudden have shifted your mindset from we need to get the corn in the ground so that we got good seed bed, good moisture to get it up and going. So now the mindset is more, we need to hurry up and get this in so we can get it in, that it's not June until the fields are fit for seeding. So there'll be a lot of long hours, a lot of long days to try and get the corn in optimum conditions.
Well, I appreciate your time and patience with me here today in this discussion, and I hope you don't have a lot of free time coming up soon, and winter is left in the rear view and it's into spring and summer for you.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Paul. And, I think all of us just, kind of resound on the fact that the moisture at the end of the day is going to be a blessing, that it certainly right now looks like, more positives will come out of this than negatives. But yeah, we're anxiously sitting here waiting to get rolling in the fields. That's for sure.
All right, Paul Thomas, appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Nice visiting with you.
My thanks to Paul Thomas for the conversation, and you can always catch all of our chats on the YouTube channel, or subscribe, follow wherever you get your podcasts. We're here every Tuesday with a new episode when we are going to be talking about weather again, but this time it's going into the eye of the storm. A little tease. We'll see you next time.